What's up everyone, and welcome back to the SkillCapped tier list for patch 11.7. As expected, we're finally seeing some nerfs to Chemtank along with other OP picks like Hecarim and Thresh. As always, our tier lists are pieced together with the help of our challenger players along with the analysis of the most up-to-date stats so you guys can have the best read on the meta. And to ensure you never miss another tier list, don't forget to smash the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you can get ahead of everyone else. Just before we get started, we'd love to hear your input on what annoys you the most in the current meta. Whether it be an item, a champion, a certain role, anything really. Personally, I'd have to go with any turbo Chemtank user. Playing as an ADC into champs like Hecarim, Udyr, or Skarner who can just press a button and take you out with no counterplay feels really awful. The amount of move speed champs can acquire in Season 11 is pretty ludicrous if you ask me. Nevertheless, let us know your thoughts down in the comments below as to what annoys you the most. With that said, let's get into it. Starting off with the item changes, we'll give you guys a quick rundown and talk about which champions will be affected the most. Serylda's Grudge will see a cost reduction going from 3,400 down to 3,200. A few ADCs like Sivir and Ezreal, along with AD assassins like Zed and Qiyana, will receive indirect buffs thanks to this change. Lord Dominik's will be receiving a nerf for this patch, as the cost is being increased from 2,900 to 3,000, along with the AD going down from 35 to 30. Since Lord Dom's and Serylda's are both armor pen items, this will now put much higher priority on Serylda's for certain champions. For someone like Zed, who performs equally as well with both items in previous patches, Serylda's will likely take over as the best tank shredding option. Most of your traditional crit marksmen who always build Lord Doms over Serylda's will become ever so slightly weaker against tanks later on. Trinity Force will receive a mini rework for 11.7, as the AD is being increased from 25 to 30, while the attack speed is lowered from 35 down to 30. A new effect to the passive will be tacked on, allowing you to gain passive stacks while hitting towers. This will in turn give Trinity Force a nice added boost to its split push power. The mythic passive will be changed from 10% attack speed per legendary to 3 AD, 3 MS, and 3 haste per legendary. Overall, it looks like Riot is trying to bring back Triforce as that keystone split push option and prevent people from rushing Essence Reaver instead. Speaking of ER, it's receiving some nerfs for 11.7 as the cost is being lowered from 2,900 down to 2,800, but the AD lowered from 55 down to 45. Considering 10 AD is worth 350 gold, the slight decrease in price is not worth what you're losing in AD. It's kinda odd Riot is taking this route, as many ER users like Xayah and Lucian are already in pretty bad states, but aren't being compensated with any buffs this patch. With these ER nerfs and Triforce buffs, we will surely see a handful of champions swap over to building Triforce now. Gangplank is one pick who's actually already been performing better with Trinity in 11.6, so you should definitely stop building ER on him and rush Trinity now. For someone like Ezreal, a Divine Sunderer rush could definitely make a comeback, or even Trinity may now be a solid pickup for him. Fiora has been the main abuser of this ER rush, yet she's still performing very well with many other build options, so we don't expect her to fall in power due to this nerf. Ever since its buffs from a few patches back, Everfrost has been completely busted on so many different champs. As a result, Riot will be toning it down a notch, with the active damage being reduced from 120 plus 35% AP down to 100 plus 30% AP. The active cooldown will be increased from 20 to 30 seconds. Overall, pretty fair nerfs, and we like the fact they're hitting the active cooldown. A 20-second CD on such an impactful CC lock tool was just way too short, and even at 30 seconds, Everfrost will still be really strong. Everfrost abusers will all become slightly weaker, but most won't feel the effects enough to drop down the tier list. The final item change goes the way of Turbo Chemtank, and we're kinda shocked it's not being hit harder. The active move speed is being lowered from 75 down to 60%, however, the slow is buffed from 40 to 50%. It's odd Riot keeps giving these obviously broken items compensation buffs. They did the same with Stridebreaker, where they decreased the damage and slow but increased the dash range, and we all know how that played out. Stridebreaker ended up just as strong, if not stronger, than before those changes. We're eyeing the same kind of effect here with Chemtank. Sure, it may end up slightly weaker, but by no means will this change reduce the strength of Chemtank to the point where you would stop buying it. Chemtank will still remain a busted item on most tank champs, so continue to abuse it for 11.7. Mordekaiser's the only top laner with buffs in the pipeline, as his Q isolation bonus damage will be increased, going from 30 scaling to 50% up to 40 scaling to 60%. For the majority of Elos, Mordekaiser has been in a pretty mediocre spot the last few patches. High Elo Mord's been struggling a bit more, but for the average rank, we've had him listed as an A tier top laner. We don't see that changing with this buff, as it's not enough to push Mord into S tier, but he'll now be a really solid A tier pickup. If we have a look at our complete top lane tier list, things are looking a bit different for 11.7. We've moved Wukong up into OP tier, accompanied by Darius, Urgot, Riven, and Garen. Wukong's been a massive sleeper pick over the past few patches, and with Trinity Force buff for 11.7, he's going to rise up even further. Wu has very few bad matchups in the meta, as he smashes most bruiser picks and performs especially well into Gnar and Darius, who are picked so much right now. As Wu moves up, we have dropped Malphite from OP into S. With Sylas buffed and being played a ton more along with Cho'Gath's rise and play rate, Mal has become a much more vulnerable blind pick. Don't get us wrong, he's still an amazing carry option, but just a cut below those other OP champs now. Thanks to the Trinity Force changes, Camille will be moving back into S tier. Jax and Aurelia could very well move up the tier list too, however, we'll have to see exactly how impactful the Triforce changes pan out to be. Unlike Jax and Aurelia, Camille has been ever so close to breaking back into S, so that's why we're confident in moving her up. Our analysts will have a really good read on the Triforce buffs for our mid-patch update tier list, so be sure to check back then to know if any other picks have moved up. The best low elo champs for top lane will include Malphite, Garen, and Urgot. Highest priority on your ban list should be Darius, Malphite, and Urgot. And remember, if you want to improve fast and get the rank that you've always wanted, then check out our hyper improvement system at SkillCapped.com. We have professional courses by the top players, Smurf commentaries where a challenger player walks you through how to climb out of every rank from iron to diamond, and we upload tons of new exclusive guides to our website every week. In fact, we're so confident you'll climb using our system that if you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using SkillCapped, you can claim a full refund, so there's no risk. What are you waiting for? Check out SkillCapped.com and get the rank you've always wanted. Link in the description below. Moving on to a bunch of jungle changes. First off, we have another nerf to Udyr. Udyr's base AD has been lowered from 66 down to 64. We all love to meme about these base stat nerfs, but especially for a jungler, it affects them more than you'd think. Not only does this nerf hurt Udyr's dueling power, but it stunts his clear speed a little as well. Even with this change though, we still see Udyr holding onto S tier by a thread for 11.7. The most OP jungler from 11.6 in Hecarim is receiving an extremely light nerf considering how busted he is. E-max move speed will be lowered from 75 down to 65%. That's it, that's the nerf. There must be a rioter who one-tricks Hecarim on the balance team, because a champion with a 54% win rate being issued this small of a nerf just doesn't make sense. Even with the chem tank nerfs tacked on, we don't expect Hec to fall out of OP. A nerf to Ivern's shield damage is in store, going from 70 scaling to 170 down to 70 scaling to 150. You'll definitely feel this change in the mid game, especially since you max E out first, but this is honestly a pretty light nerf considering Ivern's state. Believe it or not, Ivern's actually held a higher win rate than Hecarim over the past patch, and is one of the most sleeper OP junglers in the game. Our analysts don't expect that to change for 11.7, as we'll be leaving the tree in S. One of 2 junglers receiving some buffs for this patch is Kindred, as their QAD ratio will be increased from 65 to 75%, and E cooldown reduced from 18 scaling to 14 seconds down to 16 scaling to 12 seconds. Kindred's been in a pretty okay state, but the past few patches, nothing special, but not on the weak side either. Thanks to these buffs, our analysts see Kindred slotting in as a good A-tier jungle pickup. It's kind of hard to believe Amumu was at one point the most broken jungler in the game during preseason. After item nerfs and direct nerfs, he fell to a pretty bad spot, so Riot is buffing the sad mummy up in 11.7. Q mana cost will be lowered from 50 scaling to 70 down to 30 scaling to 50. E cooldown will be lowered by 1 second at all ranks. Amumu will find himself moving back up the list from B into A tier. For high elo, Amumu will still remain a pretty weak pick, but for the majority of elos, A tier is where we see him landing. Shaco is now an OP jungle pick for patch 11.7. It's been such a long time since Shaco's had the spotlight, and he'll now take full control of it this patch. W damage to monster buff along with the passive buff have directly increased Shaco's power level, but it's more so the indirect changes that have really been adding up. Hecarim, Udyr, Ivern, Karthus, Skarner, Lilia, the list really just goes on as to the junglers who have been nerfed over the past couple of patches. These 2 different reasons are why Shaco's moving up, and a pick that you cannot be sleeping on in 11.7. Kha'Zix, Elise, and Hecarim will remain the other 3 OP picks of the patch. Xin Zhao will be bumped up from B into A tier this patch, as he's starting to perform much better after his mini rework. One other adjustment we're making is moving Karthus from S down to A tier. he's feeling the effects of the Q nerf last patch more than we anticipated, so we're making the appropriate change. If you guys missed our mid-patch update tier list from 11.6, Volibear was moved up into S tier as he's a top carry pick now after his buffs. Our analysts would recommend siding with one of Mundo, Rammus, or Fiddlesticks if you're looking to barge your way out of low elo. Despite his nerf, Hecarim will still remain a top priority ban alongside Shaco and Viego. Mid lane meta will see very few alterations for 11.7 as we've only got 2 direct buffs. Lissandra Q damage is being increased by 10 at all ranks. Liss hasn't actually been in too bad of a spot recently as she's seeing more success with Everfrost and against a lot of meta picks like Yone, Yas, and Katarina. This buff will shoot Lissandra from B into A tier. Yasuo will be receiving an AD per level buff going from 2.2 up to 3. This means around level 13, you'll now have an extra 10 AD or 350 gold worth of stats. A pretty solid buff overall, but we won't be moving Yasuo up the list as he'll remain in S tier. So, like we noted a moment ago, not much movement for mid lane in 11.7. Kassadin is moving out of OP and down to S due to the Everfrost nerfs. OP picks will now consist of Galio, Anivia, and Fizz. Keep your eye on AD assassins and especially Zed this patch, as the Serylda's grudge buffs aren't anything crazy but will add a nice boost to power. We'll be watching Zed closely throughout the patch, and he could very well be making his way into OP soon. The best low elo picks to abuse for mid include Diana, Malzahar, and Annie. Look to use your ban on Fizz, Yone, or Zed. It was a pretty quiet 11.6 for ADC, as no changes were issued, but 11.7 is different, as we've got 4 direct changes. Ashe will receive a really nice buff to her W damage as it's being increased by 10 at all ranks. Considering this is such a short cooldown spell that can be spammed for poke, 10 extra damage will really add up. As a result, Ashe will be moving from A back into S tier. Varus will receive a small buff to his AD per level, going from 3 up to 3.4. Riot has tried continuously buffing Varus the past while now, but none of the changes have really resulted in much. We see the same thing happening here, as this is just another buff that will make Varus slightly stronger, but not enough to move him up the tier list. Next up for a couple of nerfs, Tristana's base AD will be lowered from 61 down to 59. It's kind of crazy that after just one patch of Tristana being on top of the meta, she's immediately nerfed. Regardless, our analysts are optimistic. Trist will remain an OP pick for 11.7. However, she'll definitely be on the edge between S and OP now. Kai'Sa, who's been one of the most broken ADCs for months now, will receive a cooldown nerf to her ultimate. The cooldown will be increased from 110 scaling to 70 seconds up to 130 scaling to 70 seconds. A decent nerf to Kai'Sa's early game that will be enough to push her out of OP tier. Of course, she won't be dropping far at all though, as Kai'Sa will continue to dominate as a great S tier pick. Having a look at our ADC tier list now, Samira, Vayne, Jinx, and Tristana will stay on top of the meta in 11.7. Like we touched on earlier, the Essence Reaver nerfs will hurt already weak picks like Xayah and Lucian, so we definitely recommend staying away from them this patch. Ezreal, Draven, and Sivir will also become slightly weaker due to the ER nerf. The 3 best low elo picks for ADC are Misfortune, Tristana, and Sivir. A few picks you should consider banning include Samira, Vayne, or Tristana. We have 3 pretty solid nerfs to a few of the top supports from 11.6, and let's start off by breaking down Thresh. Thresh W shield will be reduced from 60 scaling to 220 down to 60 scaling to 180. Guardian Thresh with W max had really started taking off in high elo recently, so this nerf is to try and combat that strategy. Keep in mind, Thresh has been by far the #1 support in previous patches, and he can still do just as well with a Q max, so this nerf will only hurt him slightly. Thresh will retain his spot in OP tier and continue to dominate the meta for 11.7. A champion we've rated a little bit below Thresh in previous patches is actually being hit with a pretty substantial nerf. Alistar's Q damage is being reduced from 60 scaling to 240 down to 60 scaling to 220, and his E damage on attack is lowered from 35 scaling to 290 down to 20 scaling to 275. This definitely puts a wrench in Alistar's all-in power, as you'll be losing out on 35 damage with a full combo at level 9 when Q is maxed out. Alistar has been a great S tier pick in previous patches, but with these nerfs, we'll be dropping the Minotaur down to A tier. The third support nerfed will be Rell, as her E stun duration is being chopped down from 0.75 seconds to 0.5 seconds. Very similar to Alistar, Rell has been holding onto S tier in previous patches, but unfortunately she'll follow suit and join Ali down in A tier as well. Braum has been slacking a bit in the weight room as of recent, so Riot will be buffing him back up to a really nice state. E cooldown will be reduced from 18 scaling to 10 seconds down to 16 scaling to 8 seconds. For such an impactful spell, 2 seconds off during teamfights is actually really huge. Our max knockup duration will be buffed as well, going from 1 scaling to 1.5 seconds up to 1 scaling to 2 seconds. Both changes combined will help lock Braum down as a good A-tier support pickup. Now, if we have a complete look at our support tier list in 11.7, Lulu, Leona, and Thresh will continue to be the best carry options. Seraphine will be sliding back into S tier as a result of the nerfs to Alistar, Rel, and Thresh. With no item adjustments for support or any other direct changes to shake things up, expect the meta to look almost identical to where it was in 11.6. Our 3 low elo recommendations are Brand, Maokai, and Swain. Some of the most impactful and highly picked supports you'll want to ban include Leona, Thresh, and Morgana. And remember, if you want to improve fast and get the rank you've always wanted, then check out SkillCapped.com, link in the description below. Alright, that's going to be it for this one. Your grasp on the meta should be really great now for 11.7, giving you that extra edge up on your opponents. So, you don't want to miss out on another tier list along with the other great content we have planned. So don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And with all that said, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.